Now, an interesting idea about the sculptures that are left behind, I think, is that they are the only things that survive. If you think of anything else that was made in in the earliest Stone Ages, in the Paleolithic period, the problem would be that anything wood or leather would have deteriorated, would have rotted and just disappeared. So what we have left are these stone items and even some things that have been fired in fire pits, some clay and some other kinds of items. So this woman from Willendorf, often sort of misnamed as the Venus of Willendorf, comes from Vienna. It's actually a European Stone Age piece of work, and it's in the Naturhistorisches Museum in Vienna, and it's really tiny. It's only about 4 inches, 4 3/4 inches tall, and it was coated with some ochre, which is a sort of reddish orange kind of substance. And when we look at this thing, I have a heading at the top of the page, Prehistory and Fetish, because I think that this thing was probably, possibly, a fetish kind of figure, meaning not like people necessarily focused on it for erotic purposes or sexual purposes, but maybe as a sort of fetish that would be used to direct some kind of spiritual energy. And what I'm suggesting in this is that this could have been a fertility figure. So the name Venus is wrong because Venus was the goddess of love, not necessarily the goddess of fertility. So it could almost be Demeter or something like that if you wanted to use the Greek mythological term. So this is a small thing, and if we look closely at it, we'll see that across the top of the figure, we'll start with the formal analysis. The hair actually looks kind of like a knit cap. There's just a little hole that could be a mouth hole or an eye hole. If we move down the figure, you see that there are arms that are engaged with the body that are carved, and they are actually draping across the breasts. The breasts are large, probably unrealistic in proportion, so is the stomach, and so are the genitals. They're sort of a little bit too big. And then the legs come down to these tiny little points, and it looks like the feet have been broken off. It's made out of limestone, it's painted, and so we refer to the process of making this thing as a subtractive sculptural process, which means you carve away stuff. And so the arms are engaged across the body probably so that they wouldn't get broken off, because it would be really hard to carve arms that would be extended off of the body. Now the next thing is that the feet were broken off because they did extend too far. Now let's look at it from possibly an iconographic or symbolic point of view. This woman is very large, and who knows what the reasons really were for making it, but let's sort of extrapolate about why we know art is made from what we looked at for the Navajo culture and we looked at for the Anasazi culture and the Northwest Coast. Art usually tells a story and also depicts things that are important in terms of the storytelling. Art also sometimes can be used as something to transform someone, like a mask transforms someone into a supernatural being, like a hamatsa. And so in this instance, this is probably an item that was used to tell a story, or it could have been used for a didactic purpose, an instructive purpose, to say that this is what a woman who is healthy and can bear children should look like. And that may be part of the reason why this was created, that it's a fertility figure, and that this woman would have been able to have babies and maintain babies because she had enough excess body weight to be able to do that kind of thing. Now, when I was going to school, I thought that this was the only one that was ever found. But there are other, actually, Venuses that were found throughout Europe. And so in this instance, we have on the left-hand side the Venus of Dolni from Vestonice, and that's Czechoslovakia. And so I think it's kind of interesting because I was taught that Africa was the cradle of civilization, yet we have these objects that we found in Europe. And both of them are of heavy women. Both of them are probably used for similar purposes. They're probably fetishistic symbols, but they could just be a plaything for a kid. They could have just been a doll. Who knows? And The interesting thing for me about this thing, aside from the fact that it's so similar to the Venus of Willendorf, is that it's made out of molded clay and bone ash. And my suspicion is that clay and bone ash were combined in a fire pit, and maybe it was sort of molded and fired in a fire pit, but it's also very possible that they found this sort of hardened, semi-soft material in a fire pit. That's why it has that black color, and they carved it away the same way that the Venus of Willendorf would have been carved as well. So in this instance, it could have been additive, meaning that it could have been molded out of semi-soft clay and carbon ash and then fired again, and that's why it's so well preserved. Or it could have been completely subtractive. Now the purposes, let's get back to that and do a sort of compare and contrast kind of idea. This Kachina from the Hopi culture was used primarily to instruct or teach children about the gods and goddesses that they would be seeing in a performance or a ritual that was given by the Hopi people. And it was small, it's portable, it's only about maybe 6 inches to a foot long. And the same thing with the Venus of Willendorf on the right-hand side. It's small, it's portable. And so it's possible to extrapolate that, knowing what we know about different cultures, that this was actually a sculpture that might have been used for an instructive purpose, to just say this is a goddess and that this is the goddess of fertility. We don't know, we'll never know until we get a time machine. So that's the biggest drag about art history, is sometimes you just don't know. Now, on the left-hand side, we have another